Okay, so hi everyone. So I'm speaking about a very common interview question, which is why medicine? I think most medical schools will ask you this in some way or another. It might not sound exactly like that question, but it will certainly be similar and be looking for a similar answer. Sorry, Alex, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please.
I'm going to attempt to, but there we
Ah, there we go. Thank you. So,
go.
some basic kind of things to think about when you think about attempting this question is firstly, everyone has their own motivations as to why they want to study medicine, and everyone's will be different, and that's completely fine. And as you know, and as I've already mentioned, this is a very commonly asked question, and so it's reasonable to start preparing for it before you go to interview. But I think my advice for that would be absolutely prepare for it and perhaps maybe make bullet points of why you want to do medicine. For example, I like science, I like helping people. Um, that's a very varied role. You can think of all of these reasons, but I wouldn't recommend learning an answer verbatim because I think that will make you sound too rehearsed when you come to interview. So I recommend learning these bullet points of points you want to get across, but then the expansion and reflection part of your answer should be a bit more natural and less kind of memorized. Um, and as well, this question might sound like it's just asking, the reasons for why medicine would be good for you, but actually, this is a really good opportunity to discuss the experiences that have actually justified why you want to study medicine. So, you certainly should be reflecting on all of your various experiences, and it's okay to not have had work experience. I'm sure you've all worked in a team, for example, in one way or another. And so any experience that is relevant, you can reflect on in your answer. Next slide, please, Alex. Thank you. So this is an example of the first answer. So we've asked someone why medicine, and this is what they've said. Ever since I can remember, I have been interested in becoming a doctor. I have always enjoyed science at school, especially biology, and I know I want a career where I can help people, so medicine seems like a good fit. I also think that being a doctor is a respected profession with good job security, which is important to me. I know it would be a challenging job, but I think I would find it very rewarding, and I like the idea that there are lots of different specialties I could explore in the future. So that's example one. So who thinks this is a good example? We're going to try and make this session a bit interactive, so feel free to contribute either verbally or in the chat. What do you think's good? Sorry, Alex, if you don't mind going back to the previous slide so we can't
I
see the answers.
Right,
No
sorry.
worries. So does anyone have any thoughts on this at all? I'll give a few moments in case anyone wants to type anything, but otherwise we'll go on.
Oh, has that just stopped sharing?
No, we're still sharing, don't worry. Thank you though. Okay, so Eva said it mentions how challenging the profession make is, which is a key marking point. So yeah, actually it's I'd say a good thing to acknowledge that you understand, the positives and the negatives about medicine. I think Amy's point as well about it being vague is a very good point. So now, if you don't mind, Alex, we'll go on to the next slide. Thank you. So some so those comments were both really spot on, but then a few other things. Yeah, Zoe as well saying they're not mentioning personal experiences, which is absolutely right, and that's really what the interviewer wants to hear is about how, your experiences have determined this decision. So another thing is the phrase "ever since I can remember" sounds very vague. That sounds like you were born wanting to be a doctor, and obviously, I don't think anyone can say that. So, clearly there have been experiences in your life that have drawn you to this vocation. So, I don't think it's very good to say ever since I can remember. It's completely reasonable I mean, in this example, we've given reasons as to why this person wants to study medicine. So they've enjoyed science and they want a career where they can help people. That's great. But again, seems like a good fit. We want to hear more about why. And you've all mentioned it in the chat that we need more reflection. So we need to know why it's a good fit. So you could say, for example, I've done this and this has made me realize I'm good at this, or I enjoy doing this. And then I also think a doctor is a respected profession. Again, that's I'd say a very weak reason as to why you want to go into medicine. Um, Medicine
This meeting is
environment
being recorded.
quite challenging at times. And I think just having a respected profession wouldn't necessarily be enough of a driving force to want to have the career. And similarly with job security, it's not a really sound reason as to why you want to study medicine. And actually, kind of topically on the news at the moment, there is a little bit of job uncertainty in some stages of medical careers. So I think again that's something to steer clear of talking about. Um, and then, yeah, it's good to acknowledge it's challenging. And maybe you can say that you understand this, but actually you want a challenge in your career. Um, and finding it rewarding, I think that's very reasonable to say. And you like the idea of there's lots of different specialties, which again shows you have a good understanding of the career. But I think my overall feedback for this example is we need a lot more reflection. So we'll go on to the next example now, if that's okay, Alex. Thank you. So the next one reads, during my work experience, I saw how powerful a strong patient-doctor relationship can be. I shadowed a doctor who not only treated a patient's medical symptoms, but also took the time to understand the personal and social challenges they were facing. Watching how this holistic approach improved the patient's well-being showed me the depth of an impact a doctor can have on someone's life. I experienced something similar while I was volunteering in a care home. Over time, I built a genuine relationship with the residents and saw how much it meant to them to feel listened to and understood. What surprised me was how much these connections affected me as well. I found it rewarding to support them, even in small ways. These experiences made me realise that I'm drawn to medicine because it allows me to combine meaningful human connection with the ability to make a lasting difference in people's lives. So, how does everyone think that example compares to our previous example? Do you think this is a good answer? And what was done well, or perhaps what could be improved? Again, I'll give a couple of minutes. And yeah, feel free as like Deirdre said to shout out in the chat on the unmute yourself as well. I mean, just simply we can do a thumbs up as well. So Eva said, it's very specific. I love the example of holistic care, but now the question, why not any other healthcare field can follow? Zoe thinks it's got good reflections and flows, mentioned more on the science aspect. Amy said it's much more detailed, but it doesn't cover all the aspects of medicine. And yeah, Samir thinks it's a better example. So yeah, completely right. And just to say as well, this isn't a complete answer. This is a snippet because otherwise it would be a very, very long answer. But I just wanted to get across the reflective part. So this actually only really talks about a couple of points as to why medicine, but of course, you'll probably have more you'd want to talk about, but this is the kind of style in which you should be answering your question. Um, Now, Eva's also mentioned it could kind of prompt the question, why not any other healthcare field? And we'll come on to this in a moment. But with the structure of multiple mini interviews, your interview questions are standardized. So you'll be asked the exact same question as other candidates. So they wouldn't be able to ask a follow-up question based solely on your answer. But again, it's a completely reasonable question to be asked at interview, which is, yeah, why not another healthcare profession?
Meeting is
Um,
being recorded.
and Zambi said as well, yeah, there's a nice linking sentence. So as you can see, you have the points and then you actually spend a lot of time talking about your personal reflections on this and why this means medicine appeals to you. So if you don't mind, Alex, we'll go on to the next slide. Thank you. So we'll just touch on this very briefly, but again, it's spoken about work experience, which shows you've been proactive in trying to understand medicine. Um, and again, you're reflecting on what you observed, so the relationship between the patient and the doctor. And again, that's a skill doctors have. So again, if you're asked a different question, which perhaps would be, why would you be a good doctor? You could maybe talk about that and flip this question slightly. Again, talking about the holistic approach again shows that you're understanding the role of a doctor. Um, and yeah, how you've experienced something similar yourself, and um, yeah, how it affected you and why that led you to want to do medicine. So now we'll move on to the next slide. So this is very briefly just to touch on Eva's point from earlier. So why not another allied healthcare profession? And that's again a commonly asked question. I think when you're answering this question, it's really important to acknowledge the vital role allied healthcare professionals have in our healthcare system. And yeah, doctors don't work alone and shouldn't work alone. It's a multidisciplinary team um, around them all working together to help the patient. So I think in your answer, it's really important you emphasize you understand the importance because it shows that you understand what the role of a doctor is. Um, and also, you'll need to use your understanding of the role of a doctor to describe why this might suit you better to a different healthcare role. Um, so, for example, um, nurses are involved in um, direct care of a patient. For a discharge coordinator might be involved more in the social aspect of the patient's life and their home situation. A pharmacist might be involved in their medications, all various and very important parts of the multidisciplinary team. And you can talk about that, but then you can talk about how you want to be a doctor because it encompasses all of these roles and you have a holistic and broad overview um, of all of these different aspects of a patient's care. And again, this question will be very individual and people will have different reasons that medicine attracts them more so than another healthcare profession. So again, think about why medicine for you and why not another healthcare profession. And then next slide, please, Alex. And then very briefly, um, just thinking about why this university. So obviously, when you're interviewing for a medical school, it'll be at a specific university. So it's important to make sure you're aware of the university you're applying to and make sure you're aware of the course structure and why it appeals to you specifically. So Hannah mentioned earlier about the structure of the Oxbridge course and how it's split very structuredly into preclinical and clinical. And other medical schools have slightly earlier patient contact. And again, that might be an aspect to consider when asked about why you're applying to a specific university. And then as well, you need to show you've done your research and you really do want to go to this university. So perhaps you could look at the societies the university has to offer, and what you might like to join and get involved with in university life. And then also remember that your medical school will be somewhere you're living for the next potentially 5 or 6 years. So, just have a not too in depth, but just a very brief understanding of the city and the area that you might be moving to. Um, because again, it shows you've done your research. Um, and just to add on this point, and it's not particularly relevant to answering this question, but um, be aware if you're applying to medical schools in England, Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland, because all of them have slightly different NHS systems. So, if you're applying for a Scottish university, for example, just make sure you're learning information about the Scottish NHS rather than the English NHS. But again, that should be fairly clear from the guidance you get when you receive your interview offers. But yeah, that's everything from me. I think we'll save questions to the end after everyone else's presentations in case they answer the questions for you. But again, feel free to put anything in the chat and we can always type a response as well.
Cool, fantastic. I think we'll move on now. So I think this should be Sunaina that's presenting
Yes.
next.
Perfect. Hi guys. So I'm going to be talking you through the ethical question. So there'll most likely be one or two questions with a bit more of an ethical lens in your interview. This is one that I got in my real Sheffield interview, so that's why I wanted to talk through it. So if you could click onto the next slide, Alex, please. I've just put in an example question here. So I'll read through it as well. So as I'm reading through it, if you guys could do the same thing and put in the chat, or just put a few words of what you think this person has done well and what they could do better. Okay. I think childhood vaccination should be mandatory because scientific evidence shows that vaccines prevent dangerous illness and that side effects are very rare. A mandate would protect children from serious disease. Many parents who decline vaccinations are influenced by misinformation, so a mandate would make sure that children are safe regardless of their parents' personal views. It would also stop major outbreaks, so if I were a doctor, I would make sure that every child in my care received all the required vaccinations. On the other hand, it is not fair to force people into medical treatments they don't feel comfortable with. It's important to trust that parents know what is best for their own child. Mandating vaccines would create tension and make people defensive, and once trust is damaged, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. Even if parents are wrong about the science, their views shouldn't be ignored. Overall, there are advantages and disadvantages on both sides of this issue, so I'm not completely certain which option would be best for everyone. So that's the first response. If we could have some thoughts from all of you of what you think this person could potentially do better, that would be great. And while you're thinking through that, I'll just explain a bit about why interviewers often ask ethical questions. So you'll all probably know that within the healthcare system, there are lots of issues that are continuously changing. And because it is such a kind of combination of social aspects and science, there is a lot of gray area in what might be considered correct and what might not be. So for ethical questions, there really is no right or wrong answer, but they'll often pose one to you so that they can see how you think and how you'd be able to navigate challenging situations in your career as a doctor. Okay, so we're getting some responses in chat. Okay, the responses are good at weighing up the last sentence isn't as strong. Lists both sides. It does immediately pick a side. Great. The final sentence doesn't make a decision, but the rest of the response is good. Addressing both sides of the argument, showing their awareness. I think they shouldn't sit on the fence, but say which side they agree with and justify it. Okay, awesome. Thank you guys. Alex, if you could move on, that would be great. Perfect. Yeah, so you all got the gist of it completely. So the reason I chose this answer is because I think it's still a really good answer. You're right, they show both sides of the issue. They're quite balanced. But you're all spot on about the last bit. The last line is not ideal because really they do want you to choose a stance either way. There is technically no right answer, and you don't have to have a opinion one way or the other. But the important thing is that you have carefully analyzed both sides of the issue and you present something at the end which shows your opinion. That's right as well. With the beginning, jumping straight in to one side or the other without outlining that there are two difficult opposing arguments to this issue, that also is not ideal. The other things I said in here is that they've given quite kind of general statements which are not super nuanced. So, for example, vaccines prevent dangerous illnesses. They definitely do, but it's also important to acknowledge that they don't always work and that there are side effects, and that side is also important to understand. Another thing I've talked about is reference to the four pillars of medical ethics. I'm not sure if you guys have heard about this at whatever stage you are. It is something that comes up quite a lot for interviews. Um, and I think an important thing is to just to like have that in your head. I'll talk about it more in the next slide, but it's also it's something to bring up because those are the pillars that ethics in this country are founded on. With the there's also, yeah, no evidence given. So we either said about the MMR scare, which we will talk about on the next slide. But yeah, having some knowledge of current events, hot topics, which Alex will talk about later, just general things that are going on in healthcare at the minute can really, really help strengthen your answer. Um, and yeah, so one thing I thought about this one is also it comes across as a bit judgmental, in suggesting that parents like are not fully aware of the science of why vaccines don't work. That is maybe potentially one reason, but it doesn't really encompass the whole breadth of why people may choose not to vaccinate their children. So yeah, but the most important thing here is the ending, which they haven't chosen a clear stance on. So Alex, if you could move on, please.
There we go.
Great, thank you so much. So sorry, I know this is a bit of a block of text. We won't go through all of it. Um, I'll just highlight a few important things which a lot of you have picked up on already. In which is at the beginning, I think something that really helped me was just outlining, not just for ethical questions as well, but just in general, just generally outlining what you're going to say moving forward. I would say sort of, I'm going to talk about this, and then this, and then this. And it also just buys you some time in the beginning to kind of collect your thoughts, and it makes it easier for the interviewer to have like a guideline of what you're going to say. Um, we have I've added in here the MMR crisis. So that's something that you can also be aware of. So I was always reading things like BBC Health and like the Guardian's health page just to like see what's in the news and see what's going on in healthcare. Um, Another thing is autonomy. The four pillars are important to talk about, but you have to make sure you do it in kind of a way that doesn't make you feel like you're just like saying a bunch of buzzwords. So trying to integrate it into your answer, is it's a difficult line to walk, but I think it really does strengthen your answer. And also more like crucially at the end is that they have given one opinion. And you can see that it's not necessarily a very clear opinion. It's not, I am pro vaccine mandate, but they have given something that they haven't just said, I'm not really sure. So that's something that's very important with ethical questions. And yeah, I think that's everything I have just in the interest of time. Um, but yeah, so ethical questions, I would say my recommendations for it are making sure you're reading the news quite often. There are a few kind of classic cases that they like you to know about, which don't necessarily normally come up. But having a good nuanced understanding of the key topics in the current topics in medicine. For example, I got questions on strike action too. So that's something that is still very relevant today. So knowing about those things, reading the news, and also I would recommend having, you don't need to do it, you've done it already for your situational judgment, but having just a look over the good medical practice guide can also help just to see what the NHS likes to align with so that you can kind of integrate that into your answers too.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you. So we've got one last question, which is my one. In the interest of time, I will whiz through it slightly, so I won't read through the whole answer, but I'll kind of just pick up on the key points, and you can kind of hopefully read it along as we go, but these slides will be available at the end as well. So this question is, describe a time when you worked effectively in a team, identify the attributes of this team that contributed to its success, and relate that to a role of the doctor in the NHS. So with this question, it's really just kind of getting you to think out the box a little bit and thinking about what experiences you can draw on and how you can relate to things that you've already done in your life and how that's going to make you a stronger and a better doctor. So this is one of those really good examples again of where if you have done your work experience, you can bring it into other questions that aren't necessarily specifically work experience questions. And I think that will actually demonstrate a really strong answer because it shows that you've understood the value of those work experience opportunities that you've had and you understand why they were important to do. You didn't just do them because you had to do it to tick a box on your application. So we'll start with one that's kind of the weaker answer, and we'll just go through kind of a few points about why this makes this a slightly less strong answer. The main thing I want you to take away from this is just comparing and contrasting this to the next one and really understanding why this is a weaker answer and why the other one is stronger. So the example that this person's used, and then I've given a stronger version of it afterwards, is essentially essentially they were doing a biology project at school, and they got allocated into groups, and they had to make a presentation in those groups. So with this example, they've chosen a situation where they got paired up with their friends. It's not necessarily a prerequisite that you have to pick an example of where you worked in a team that you'd never worked in before or with people that you'd never met. But ideally, if you can find an example where you did do that, it's much better. Hopefully, you should have an understanding that doctors don't get to choose who they work with every day. The nature of the NHS as well is that most of the time you'll work with completely different teams every day. So being able to find an example that you can pick out where you've actually had to challenge yourself to work with people that maybe you wouldn't usually pick, and maybe that gets you to use different communication skills that you wouldn't usually use, or problem solving or things like that, just really helps you to demonstrate that you have that kind of understanding. Probably the most sort of negative or weaker part of this answer is that it's very descriptive. And being descriptive doesn't tell me that you understand why being able to work well in a team is important for being a doctor. It's great that you can tell me all about the project that you did, but I want to understand why being involved in this team will make you a stronger doctor, and how you can translate that project that you did at school to when you'll be on awards working as a doctor, and why you understand that those sort of links are relevant. I think as well with this one, again, kind of going through that being too descriptive doesn't really help you identify the qualities of a good team and how this will contribute to their success. So I think particularly just kind of jumping from, oh, we worked really well as a team, and that meant that we could produce a successful poster, doesn't really tell me about what you know about why a team needs to work well and how a team needs to work well, and how working as a team can create a better product than if you were to do that thing by yourself. I think as well, if you can really kind of reflect on, if you are able to understand opportunities and situations where doctors need to work in a team, and you can kind of relate that to experiences that you've had, it again really just helps you sort of translate that understanding. So I think this sort of a stronger point of this is that it does identify that a doctor needs to be able to work in a team, but it kind of then fails to go that next step and talk about why that's important and how you've developed those skills and how you would be able to translate them. And then it's just kind of, you need to understand about the benefits of being in a team. So again, it's kind of just lacking that understanding of, you've identified that you can work in a team and doctors need to work in a team, but you need to go that extra mile and identify why it's important that you have those skills and why that will make you a best doctor as a result. So we then got a kind of stronger response here, and this one really focuses on straight away identifying specific skills that they developed. So I think, for example, in here, they've got a very brief description of what happened. So we understand the context of the group and things that happened, but they immediately go straight into identifying those specific attributes. So things like communicating effectively. And then they talk about why those things are relevant to being a doctor. So for example, this one here uses the phrase, doctors are one of the many healthcare professionals working within the NHS MDTs. So that's something that doctors are a part of every single day. And it really shows the interviewer that you understand the structure of the NHS and how doctors kind of slot into those teams, and actually not just saying, oh, doctors need to be able to do teamwork, but you understand the structure of those teams and how doctors fit into those teams, and why being able to work well in that team will make you a better doctor as a result. And I think what really makes this response strong as well is that right at the end, it goes back and it reflects on those opportunities. So it's able to take that whole process of something that they did in the team. They identify how a doctor needs to work in a team and how that will make a doctor's job better. And then they can take out those specific attributes that they did in that team and translate them into how they'll apply that to being a doctor. So again, it's really just kind of focusing on that reflective process and being able to sort of take the interviewer through the team that you worked in, skills that you developed in that team, and why those skills made that team effective. Knowing and identifying that doctors work in a team and how they fit into teams and how they need to fit into lots of different teams with lots of different people. And then going back to those skills that you developed and recognizing how they'll make you a stronger doctor. So I think that's everything that we've got for kind of our weak and strong responses.
You've got some questions there, Alex.
Yes, I've just seen. Okay. Well, start with the bottom and we'll work up. So we've got, as a year 12 student, what can I do to prepare for the interviews, applications at the moment? I would say personally, I think the biggest thing is don't burn yourself out. I think you really don't need to be panicking about them in year 12. I think if you sort of think about them too intensely now, you'll almost get past your best point and actually just be quite burnt out by the interviews. I think things that you can do now is get yourself as many experiences as you can. So try and find some work experience. But again, it can just be things like working in a coffee shop or volunteering in the hospice in your town or things like that. And just really starting to maybe teach yourself how to do some reflections. So taking any sort of experiences that you've had and sitting down with a piece of paper and thinking, what did I see? What did that teach me? What did that make me think? How did I feel in that moment? Did I feel like that doctor did something that was really positive or really negative? What would I do differently? And just sort of training yourself to do that reflective process. I'm not sure if anyone has any other suggestions at all, but
Yeah, I'd say at this stage, it's still really early. So the most important thing is focusing on making sure your A levels are going well and that you're on track in that. And yeah, as Alex said, just making sure that you've got lots of experiences going that you'll be able to talk about later on down the line. So volunteering, work experience, but that's secondary to volunteering, I'd say. Like Hannah said, all those sort of super curricular activities, reading around your subjects, trying to get some interest in trying to make sure that you have a really good understanding of what your interests are in general. I think that's the most important thing right now.
perfect. We've got a couple more questions, so I think we'll move on. So the next one we've got is how early did you know you wanted to go into medicine? When do you think you need to fully commit to the process? Does anyone want to take that one first?
I mean, that's a bit tricky because I think for everyone it's very different. I think I decided I wanted to do medicine when I was probably about 14, but I wouldn't say I'd necessarily committed to the process at that point. I just started developing an interest. I think when you need to start actively preparing is probably once you're in sixth form. You need to start thinking about what experiences do I need to have so I can talk about it at interview. But really, I know some people who kind of decided in the summer before or the summer of UCAT that they wanted to do medicine. So they sat their UCAT exam and then prepared for everything else between the exam and interviews. But obviously that's very tight and it can be quite difficult when you're juggling your A levels and so many other parts of the application process. So I'd probably say to comfortably, feel ready for this process, I'd probably start thinking about it in sixth form and getting some consistent volunteering early on. But again, I think it's very varied. I don't know what your experiences were, Alex and Snana.
Yeah, I think for me, I knew quite late. It was about I'd say like at the end of October of my year 12. So I think compared to a lot of my friends who knew quite early on, I did feel a bit sort of on the back foot. But I think that's more than enough time to make sure that you've got everything together. I think anything later than maybe like March or April is slightly starting to push it because the most important thing is your A levels and making sure you're focusing on your mocks and things. So I'd say year 12 is like a good time. The early year 12 is a good time to lock it in.
And sorry,
Yeah,
just to say, oh, sorry, Alex, go ahead.
that's okay. No, you go first.
I was just going to say one other thing is obviously choosing your A levels. So if you know you certainly want to do medicine, you'll have to do chemistry and most likely biology. So obviously if your A levels don't fit that, then you're a little bit more limited as to where you can apply. So that's again a consideration. If you know early, you can choose your A levels accordingly.
Yeah, no, I think I would fully back up all those points. I think for me, I was someone who knew really early. So most of my family kind of work in healthcare, and I'd always been sort of around that environment. So I kind of knew that it was what I wanted to do. But I think it's also so okay to not fully be sure what you want to do. I think maybe knowing that you want to go into healthcare, but not being sure whether that's physiotherapy or nursing. I think even once I'd started medicine, I realized quite how many different like roles and jobs there are in the NHS and how they all do so many different things. So I think it's okay to know that you've got an interest in an area and then maybe starting to sort of explore that slowly and working out if that's for you or not for you. And either way, that's okay. But don't feel like you have to put pressure on yourself to decide that you want to do medicine, know exactly where you want to study it, and decide what sort of doctor you want to be at the end of it. You know, I'm in my last year, and a lot of my friends don't know what they want to do with their jobs after they leave sort of uni and stuff. So don't feel like you have to have it all planned out now. It will sort of work itself out as you go along. I think we've got a couple more questions, so we'll move on. So the next one is there 5 minutes to say your answer for an interview with prep time before? Should you speak for 5 minutes or a bit shorter to allow follow-up questions that may lead to a better answer with the interviewer? That's a really tricky one because all of the different unis will structure their sort of MMIs or panel interviews and things like that slightly differently. Usually most of them are relatively transparent with you before the interview that you'll get like a document that you'll be sent on an email and it will sort of tell you what the structure is and how long you have for each answer and things like that. I would say speak for the full time if you can. But definitely don't feel like you have to rush. It's okay to sort of have them read the answer to you and then think, okay, I need 3 seconds just to think about this, rather than rushing into it, saying the first thing that comes into your head and then thinking, why on earth did I go down that avenue? Now I've got to talk about that for 5 minutes. So do talk for the full time if you can. But again, it's okay halfway through to sort of pause for 5 seconds and say, I just need a few seconds to gather my thoughts. And I don't know if you guys have had any other experiences at all.
Also, if they do have follow-up questions to ask you and you're sort of getting to the end of your time, they will just cut you off and move on. And that's not to say that they don't, appreciate what you're saying. They just do have like questions they need to get through. So don't be like worried if they do cut you off and ask another question because they just want to hear the full breadth of what you have to say.
I would add to that as well. So I do the interviews for my medical school now because mine uses students to them as well. And we have quite strict criteria on like what we have to ask you. So if we're cutting you off and things, it's not necessarily because we think your answer is terrible or you've been talking for too long. It's just because we like have a process that we have to get through. So try not to be put off by things like that.
Yeah, I would also like to add, I think it's unlikely unless you're at a panel Oxbridge interview for them to be able to ask you follow-up questions anyway, because like Alex was saying, the questions are very structured and it wouldn't be fair to ask you follow-ups and not another student. So it would be unlikely for you to be asked those. And for me personally, I actually, for most of my questions, had some time at the end. And I think don't be afraid to sit in silence because I think they're assessing your communication skills. So ultimately, it's much better to sound precise and well thought out than someone who's just rambling aimlessly to fill up the time. So feel confident that if you've answered the question well, and you have nothing more to say, don't feel you have to say something because actually it could weaken your answer.
Cool. I think we've got one more question. So it says not to do with interviews, but when picking A-level options, does the subject you pick other than biology and chemistry matter to the university? So that is completely and entirely university dependent. So if there is a specific place that you know you want to apply to and you haven't picked your A-level options yet, I would do your research, find out if they look for something specifically. So some will require maths, but I don't think all of them do. I would also even look into how the university like grades the grades and things. So some will use your GCSE grades more than your A levels. So it might be important that you've taken certain GCSEs or certain A levels and vice versa. So if you are in a position where you can do your research, I think having the information is kind of the upper hand and the best thing that you can do. But as I say, it's completely university dependent. So have a look on the websites and things like that.
And just to add as well, I mean, this might feel a little bit down the line for some of you, but if you're thinking about intercalating, and again, different medical schools have different policies on this, you may need specific A levels for that. So, for example, this is an oddly specific example, but for example, if you wanted to intercalate in engineering at Cambridge, I think you need specific A levels for that in addition to getting into medical school. But again, that's to worry about later down the line. But if you really, really know what you want to do, worth considering.
So I think we've kind of addressed the main questions and we have run over a little bit with time. So really sorry about that, everyone. If you've got any other questions, feel free to email them afterwards and give us any feedback on things you want to see next time. So we'll be getting in touch sort of in early January to reassess when the next meeting will be and see who wants to attend and things like that. So hopefully look forward to seeing your emails then, and we'll let you know what the session will be running on. But thank you everyone for coming today, and hopefully that was helpful.